When the hammer hit that rotten wooden platform, my life was sold for 4,000 reis. The price of a thin cow in times of drought was what it was worth when I was 12 years old, sold by my own stepfather. And who bought me? Precisely him, my step-grandfather, the old man who dishonored my mother before me. A disaster like this seems like something out of a soap opera, but it happened right here in this backlands of my God, where the devil makes his home when no one is looking. My name is Josefa Clementina de Alencar, but everyone around here knows me as Dona Zifa from the shelter. Today I carry 88 years on my back, a hunchback from so much hard work. And those hands full of stains that have held many women broken by life. I live in this simple little house in Quixada, under the Chicken Rock, surrounded by portraits of my daughters, all the women I saved after I learned to save myself. Who sees me today? An old lady with white hair tied in a bun, wearing a flowery chintz dress and worn-out flip-flops, cannot imagine the life I have led. And you who are watching me now, my daughter or my son, tell me in the comments which corner of Brazil is listening to me. I'd like to know if my story is going far. And if this video touches your heart, leave a like for this old lady here. Age may have taken away my strength, but my memory is still good, you know? And the sharp tongue too. I was born in 1935, in the driest backlands of Ceará, into a family that only had a family name. My father, Severino, was a cattle driver, a man of few words and a lot of drink. When he was at home, which was rare, he either slept or knocked. In my mother Sebastiana, especially in us, the 5 children, only when there was anger left over. Still, he was the one who put food on the table. So, his presence, as bad as it was, meant a full belly. Our house was a mud hut on the side of the road, with a thatched roof that let the rain in on the few days she came to visit these parts. A dirt floor, a crooked table, mats to sleep on and a wood stove were all our wealth. There wasn't even a bathroom. The needs were taken care of in the bush, cleaned with bush leaves even in the life that God gave us. Everything fell apart when Dad never came back. He went on a trip with the troops and after 3 months without news, a friend of his appeared bringing his hat and the news. Had died in a bar fight, stabbed because of a gambling debt. We didn't even have a body to watch over. From then on it was just a tumble. Mom, who was already weak in the head due to suffering, became worse. She cried in the corners, talked to herself, and even forgot to eat. The oldest, my brothers Antonio and Jose, aged 14 and 13, went out into the world looking for work. I never heard from them again. That left me, just 10 years old, and the little ones, Maria, 7, and Joaquim, 5. Hunger knocked on the door hard. It was no longer that little hunger that nipped at my belly every now and then, no. It was a devouring hunger that made us pick through the garbage at the market, that made us eat roots from the forest, even without knowing if they were poisonous, that made Joaquim cry all night with pain in his empty stomach. That's when he appeared, Inácio Ferreira dos Santos. Everyone called him Mr. Ferreirinha, a short, fat man in his 60s, a widower with no children, who had been married to my grandmother's sister for a short time. In practice, he was nothing like ours, but he presented himself as my grandfather. He owned a warehouse in the city and a small farm beyond the reservoir. Sebastiana, he said to my mother on that sweltering afternoon. It is not right for a widow with a child to be in need like this. I'll take you to my farm. There is food there is a roof over their heads and the children can even study with the teacher who teaches the children of my employees. It seemed like salvation. And when your stomach rumbles loudly, any promise sounds like gospel. We packed the few rags we had into a bundle and climbed into his wagon that same day. Joaquim's smile when he received a piece of rapadura in his hand, the first sweet in months, still breaks my heart when I remember it. The farm was far away, far from the city. To get there, it was an hour by cart on a dirt road, then an old gate and another half-hour between Juiziro trees and chic until you saw the main house. It wasn't a big house, but for people who came from a small house, it looked like a palace. Masonry house, clay tiles, glass windows and even a balcony in the front. In the early days, evil was hidden behind smiles and brown sugar. We had a little room in the back, food on the table 3 times a day and even clothes that Grandpa Ferrierinha brought from the city. Mom was put to work in the kitchen. Maria helped with the washing and I took care of Joaquim. The teacher never showed up. It was after a month that things started to change. Ferrierinha started arriving home drunk almost every night, yelling at Mom for any nonsense. This food is __. This house is filthy. You're really useless, Sebastiana. Soon the shouting turned to shoving and the shoving turned to slapping. Mom, who was already weak in the head, was getting worse. He began to spend hours staring into space. He would forget in the middle of his tasks, sometimes he wouldn't even answer when we called him. One day I woke up and she had cut her hair all unevenly, saying that there were bugs crawling on her head. In another I found her washing clothes in the sink at 3 in the morning, singing lullabies. The look Ferrierinha started giving me gave me the creeps. It wasn't the look of a grandfather, nor of a decent person. It was the look of someone calculating, of someone evaluating the merchandise. I started hiding when he arrived, sleeping under the bed when I could, pretending to have a stomachache so I wouldn't have to sit at the table with him. Everything got worse when some of his friends started showing up at the farm. Bad-looking men, smelling of kashika and straw cigarettes, who looked at me the same way he did. One night I overheard their conversation on the porch. Zika's yielded more than 5,000 last month, said one. This one is worth more, replied Ferrierinha. It's still new, unused, at the right age. Colonel Massino will pay well for it. And the mother? Asked the other. That one is already finished. It's not even good enough to cook properly, it's more like a madhouse than anything else. I'll send the little ones to an orphanage in Fortaleza or I'll sell them if there's a buyer. I froze from head to toe. I didn't really understand what they meant, but I knew it was bad, very bad. I tried to talk to Mom the next day, but she just stared at me with empty eyes, fiddling with her rosary without praying, repeating, "May God protect you, daughter. May God protect you." The following weeks were filled with bone-deep fear. Ferrierinha began to treat me differently. He no longer made me work hard, he gave me better food than the others. He even brought me a new dress from the city, the first new dress I had ever had in my life. But along with that came that disgusting look, that hand that would accidentally brush against my body when he passed by me. Those questions about whether I was a grown woman yet. Maria, my little sister, at 8 years old, seemed to understand more than I did. Zifa. She told me one night, when we were lying on the same straw mattress. He's going to take you away. I heard him talking in the shed. There's a man who buys girls. He buys them like that, Maria. People can't be bought. I answered in my innocence as a girl raised in the backlands. He does. The daughter of Dona Antonia from the store was sold year past. They said she went to work in a family home in Fortaleza, but everyone knows she didn't. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about running away, but where to? I didn't know anything beyond that farm and our abandoned cottage. I had no money, I couldn't read a piece of paper with an address on it, and I was afraid of leaving Maria and Joaquim behind. And poor Mom, she wasn't even capable of taking care of herself anymore. The day that changed everything came on a Tuesday. I remember it well because it was market day in the city. Ferrierinha showed up at our little room early in the morning, wearing a white dress like the kind of clothes a young girl wears for her first communion, but it wasn't for church. "No, put this on and wash your hair well," he ordered, also throwing a piece of fragrant soap in my hand. Today we are going to visit a friend of mine who wants to meet you. When I came out of the makeshift bath in the back sink, I found Mom sitting on the doorstep of our room. For the first time in a long time, his eyes seemed clear, focused on me. "My daughter," she said, taking my hands in hers. "What's going to happen today is not your fault, nor mine, even if I carry this burden until the end of my days. It's the world that's mean to women like us. Always remember, where there's life, there's hope. And one day, God willing, you'll understand that your mother tried as best she could." She took an old rosary with faded blue beads from inside her dress. "It belonged to your grandmother. Hide it well, where no one can see it or take it from you. It will protect you when I can't anymore." I hid the rosary inside my underwear, as she asked. It was the last time I saw my mother clearly in her eyes, the last valuable thing she gave me besides her life. The next day, when I returned to that farm, I learned that she had hanged herself from a jua tree behind the house. But that's getting ahead of myself. That Tuesday, Ferrier and Ha put me on the machete along with him and two other men I'd never seen before. We passed through the city, but didn't stop at the fair. We continued for another hour until we reached a large farm like the one used by rich people, with a two-story house and many servants. We were taken to a shed away from the main house. When we entered, the smell of mold and sweat got to me. There were about 15 people inside, most of them important-looking men, sitting on chairs arranged in a semicircle. In the center, a wooden platform, like a small stage lit by lanterns. And there were other girls too, about 5 or 6, all young like me, some looking even younger, maybe 10, 11 years old. They were all dressed up like me, with dresses that didn't match the place, nor the fear in their eyes. We were lined up against the wall, like dolls on a shelf. A fat man, wearing a suit despite the heat, stood up and began to speak. "Gentlemen, welcome to our special event. As always, we bring you top-quality merchandise, healthy young women, suitable for all types of domestic service and other services that you desire." The loud laughter that followed that speech made my stomach turn. It was then that I understood, I really understood what was happening. It wasn't a visit to a friend, it was an auction. And we were what was being sold. One by one, the girls were called to the stage. The man in the suit introduced them, talked about their age, said they were healthy, obedient, without vices. The men sitting down were bidding, numbers that at the time I didn't even understand the real value of. A girl cried as she was groped like a fair animal and given a hard pinch by the man in the suit. When it was my turn, my legs were shaking so much I thought I was going to fall. I climbed onto the platform and the light from the lamps blinded me for a moment. "This one, gentlemen, is special," announced the auctioneer. 12 years old, recently completed. Virgin guaranteed by the supplier, healthy as a pear. Look at that beautiful hair, that flawless skin. It will serve any purpose you may require and will last for many years. A first-class investment. The bidding has begun. Numbers being shouted, men leaning in to get a better look at me, some even reaching up to touch my arm, my hair. I felt like a piece of meat in a butcher's shop. I felt less than a person. That was when the shed door opened and a man came in who hadn't been there since the beginning, tall, thin, with gray hair at the temples and a better suit than the others. When I saw him, something about him seemed familiar, but I couldn't remember where. 4,000 reis, he said, without even waiting to hear what the current bid was. The hall fell silent. It was a lot of money, from what I understood from the surprised expressions. The auctioneer smiled, looked around to see if anyone would cover the offer and, as no one came forward, he brought down the hammer and sold the item to Colonel Massino. Only then did I realize who he was. That man, the colonel from Massino, was the same one who years ago came to visit our house when Dad was traveling. The same thing that Mom hid from visitors, saying it was an adult matter. The same person I later found out was the real father of my sister Maria, the result of encounters that were not consensual at all. He was not my grandfather by blood, nor by consideration. It was my mother's stepfather, the man who had disgraced her in her youth, and now he was buying me like one would buy a head of cattle. When our eyes met, I saw something in those eyes that chilled my soul more than anything before. Recognition. He knew exactly who I was and had come to the auction especially for me. That's what he said to the auctioneer as he looked me up and down. I've kept it for a long time. It's a family matter, you know? And laughed. A laugh that I carry in my nightmares to this day. Before continuing, I ask everyone to subscribe to this channel. It is very important that you subscribe to this channel, to continue bringing new grannies from all over Brazil here every day. I left that warehouse like someone leaving a nightmare, but only to enter an even worse one. Colonel Massino grabbed me by the arm tightly, dragging me out without saying a word, while paying the auctioneer with the other hand. Those 4,000 reis in yellowed notes were the price of my misfortune. A carriage was waiting for us outside. He threw me in there, like someone throwing a sack of flour. My white dress, the one that the blacksmith had given me to make it look like top-quality merchandise. It was already dirty with dirt and had a tear in the hem. The colonel didn't even look back, he just gave the order to the coachman. To the farm, and not a word about what he saw here today. It was pitch black when we started our journey. The sky in the backlands, normally starry and beautiful even on the worst days, seemed dark and threatening. A hot wind blew dust in our direction, heralding one of those storms that rarely visit the backlands, but when they do, they bring destruction. I clutched my grandmother's rosary inside my dress, praying quietly, trying to understand what had happened, what was going to happen. Colonel Massino was not my real grandfather. I knew it. It was the man who had wronged my mother years ago, her stepfather, who should have been like a father, but was a demon in disguise. And now I was in his hands. "Where are you taking me?" I asked with a shaky voice after almost an hour of silence. "To your new home," he replied without looking at me. "I should be grateful. I paid dearly for you. Do you have any idea how many heads of cattle you could buy with 4,000? And for a tomboy like you. Does my mother know where I am?" I insisted, still hoping that she had a plan, that she would rescue me. He let out a dry laugh, the kind that has nothing to do with joy, just malice. "That crazy girl probably doesn't even know her name at this point. And even if I knew what I was going to do, no one cares what happens to people like you." His words fell upon me like whips. Deep down, I already knew it was true. Mom was too sick to save me. My brothers were too young and the older ones had disappeared into the world. Nobody cared about the fate of a poor girl from the backlands. We were less than people, merchandise. As the auctioneer had made clear. Colonel Damasceno's farm was the largest in the region. Everyone knew. Even in our poverty, I had already heard about the lands that stretched as far as the eye could see, the cattle that no one could count because they were so numerous, the big house that looked like a palace. When we finally arrived, after almost 3 hours of traveling, I saw that the rumors were not lying. The farmhouse was an imposing 2-story building, all white, with blue windows and a porch that ran around the entire house. There was even a fountain in front, something I had only seen in the town square. Lanterns lit the entrance and servants came running when the carriage stopped. "Take her to the back room," the colonel ordered a middle-aged woman with a lined face and downcast eyes. "Give her a bath and clean clothes. We'll decide what to do tomorrow." The woman, whose name I later discovered was Antonia, led me through the big house. We passed through huge rooms with furniture I had never seen before, mirrors bigger than a person, pictures on the walls. My feet, bare and dirty, seemed to desecrate that polished floor. The back room was not in the big house, but in an annex near the kitchen. It was small, with a simple bed, an old closet and a metal basin. Still, it was better than any place I had ever slept. "Take off those clothes," Antonia ordered, already filling the basin with water she had brought in a bucket. Her tone was not aggressive, but it was not at all kind either. It was the tone of someone who was simply following orders. As she washed me with a piece of rough soap, Antonia watched me with tired eyes. "Where did you come from, girl?" she finally asked. "From Mr. Blacksmith's farm," I replied, still holding back tears. "He took me to a place where there were rich men and sold me to the colonel. My mother and brothers stayed there. I need to get back to them." Antonia shook her head, her gaze now mixing pity with resignation. "There's no going back, girl. What's done is done. You better get used to it. This is your place now, but I don't want to stay here," I protested, the tears finally streaming down my face. "What's the colonel going to do to me?" She looked away, throwing a simple, cleaner nightgown in my direction. "You must already know. He didn't spend 4,000 for nothing. I didn't sleep that night. I kept looking at the door, expecting it to open at any moment and for the colonel to appear. But he didn't come. Maybe he was tired from the trip, or maybe he wanted to make me apprehensive, increasing my fear. If that was the case, he succeeded. When the sun rose, Antonia appeared with a tray of food, bread, coffee with milk, even a piece of cheese. Food for rich people. But I couldn't eat anything. My stomach was churning with tension. "Eat, girl," Antonia insisted. "You'll need strength." "For what?" I asked. "To work. Now, do you think you're going to be idle?" That's when I understood that perhaps the colonel hadn't bought me for what I imagined. Maybe I was just another maid in the house like Antonia. The relief was short-lived. "From today onwards you will help me in the kitchen," continued Antonia. "But at night, the colonel wants you to go to the big house. He has plans for you." The day passed in a blur of tasks. I learned to clean huge pots, peel vegetables, and sweep the dirt floor in the kitchen. Antonia wasn't much of a talker, but she wasn't cruel either. Showed me how to do things without shouting, unlike so many people I had met up until then. As I worked, I learned more about the place. The Bombdestino farm, as it was called, was one of the largest cotton producers in the region. He had more than 50 employees, including field, house, and stable workers. The colonel, a widower for many years, was feared by everyone. Had 5 children, all boys, but none of them lived on the farm. They were in capitals, studying or taking care of their father's business. "What about his wife?" I asked as I washed the lunch dishes. "He died a long time ago," replied Antonia. "They say it's out of disgust. The colonel was never a one-woman man, if you know what I mean." I understood him all too well. And I felt a shiver run down my spine, imagining how many Zaphas had passed through that farm before me. In the middle of the afternoon, a storm broke over the region, as the sky had threatened the night before. Heavy rain, the kind that brings joy to the backlands, but also fills rivers and destroys bridges. The field workers came running for shelter and the big house was in an uproar. "The colonel will have to sleep in the city," said one of the foremen, entering the kitchen, all wet. "The Dry Creek Bridge fell down in the rain. Just come back tomorrow. With luck." I heard that as if I had received the news that I had escaped the gallows for another day. It was another night of security, more time to think about what to do. I spent the night planning an escape. I discreetly asked Antonia where the nearest city was, what the road was like, what time the employees left in the morning. She didn't notice my intentions or pretended not to notice, but the rain stopped during the early hours of the morning and the colonel's plans couldn't be postponed for much longer, not after having invested 4,000 reis in his new acquisition. He arrived just after noon in a bad mood after having slept badly in the city. He entered the kitchen like a raging bull, asking for me straight away. "Where's the girl? Where is she?" he demanded to know. Antonia pushed me forward slightly and I was face to face with him. In the light of day, it looked even more menacing than it had in the memory of the night of the auction. He was tall and stout, with a gray mustache and small eyes that seemed to measure everything in terms of money. "It's clean, at least," he grumbled, looking me up and down. "I want her in the big house after dinner and dressed up decently, understand?" "Yes, boss," Antonia replied, her head down. The next few hours were filled with dull terror, the kind that paralyzes you inside. I helped Antonia prepare the Colonel's dinner. Roast beef, rice, and string beans, a meal that would feed 3 families like mine. He ate alone in the huge dining room, served by a young man dressed all in white. When the sun began to set, Antonia took me back to the little back room. She brought out a light blue dress, simple but clean, and helped me get dressed. She combed my hair with a common, almost maternal care. "Girl," she finally said when we were done. "What's going to happen today is not your fault. Try not to resist too much, or he'll get angrier." The cruelty of that phrase, spoken with the intention of helping, hit me like a punch. That was confirmation of what I had suspected since the auction. The Colonel had not bought me to work in the kitchen or clean the house. It was for something else, the worst of all. "I don't want to go," I murmured, tears already welling up in my eyes. Dripping. "I don't want." Antonia squeezed my hand, a quick gesture of solidarity. "None of us wanted to, girl. None of us wanted to." Those words told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't the first, it wouldn't be the last. How many girls had suffered the same fate on that farm? How many had been bought like me, or simply taken by force from their families? The boy in white came to get me when the first star appeared in the sky. He led me through the large house, through hallways and rooms to an ornate wooden door upstairs. He knocked 3 times and the Colonel's voice told him to come in. His room was huge, with a bed that seemed bigger than the entire hut where I was born. There were mirrors, fine fabric curtains, a dresser with bottles of expensive liquor, and he was there. Sitting in an armchair, already wearing a nightgown, drinking something that smelled strong. Finally, he said when I entered, "Come here, I want to see if it was really worth 4,000. I stood there, petrified with fear. He stood up impatiently and came towards me. He grabbed my face with one hand, squeezing my cheeks tightly. "I should have known who you were from the beginning, girl. Those eyes are just like your mother's when she was your age. Just so you know, I didn't even have to pay for her. She was part of my house, she was under my roof, but I paid a good amount of money for you. And do you know why?" I couldn't answer, my eyes wide with terror. "Because your mother escaped me, she ran away when she got pregnant and always wanted to finish what I started with her. Now I have you in her place." It was at that moment, faced with the horror that awaited me, that I made the decision. I wouldn't be like Mom. I wouldn't carry this pain for the rest of my life. I would go slowly crazy with the weight of the abuse. If I was going to die, I would die fighting. On the nightstand next to the bed there was a heavy lamp with a metal base. When he turned for a moment to pour another drink, I grabbed the lamp with all the strength my skinny 12-year-old arms had, and hit him in the head with all the pent-up anger, all the despair, all the fear. The noise was horrible, a wet sound of metal against flesh and bone. He staggered, dazed, blood running down his forehead, but he didn't fall. He was a big, strong man, used to drinking and fighting. The wretch screamed, advancing towards me like a wounded bull. I ran to the door, but he grabbed me by the dress, tearing the fabric. He threw me violently on the bed, falling on top of me with all his weight. His hands found my neck and began to squeeze. "I'm going to teach you the respect your mother never learned," he growled, as I fought desperately for air. That's when the door burst open. Antonia was there, and next to her was a tall black man who I recognized as one of the field workers. In his hand was a shotgun. "Let her go, Colonel," the man said, his voice surprisingly calm for the situation. "Are you crazy, Damiano?" the colonel asked, still holding me by the neck, but loosening his grip a little. "Do you know what happens to a black man who threatens a white man in this land?" "I know, yes, sir, but I also know what happens to the man who abuses a child. At least I know now." Antonia stepped forward, determined as I never imagined she could be. "Enough, Colonel. We won't let this happen. Not this time. You'll regret this," he threatened, finally letting me go. "You'll pay dearly." Damiano, the man with the shotgun, stepped forward. "Maybe, but you're going too. That girl is leaving here with us now, and if you try to stop her, this farm will need a new owner." The colonel looked from Damiano to the shotgun, calculating his chances. Even drunk, he could tell they weren't good. "Get that __ out of my sight," he finally said. "And you both fired. Tomorrow I don't want to see even a shadow of you around here." Damiano picked me up without saying a word. And we walked out of the room, Antonia right behind us. On the stairs, she stopped and looked back. "There's one more thing, Colonel," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "There's a cart out there, full of people who know what happened today. If anything happens to us or to this girl, everyone will know that the great Colonel of Massino buys children to abuse." It was the first time I saw fear in that man's eyes. The fear of someone who has a lot to lose: money, position, respect. Even in the backlands of 1947, where the law of the strongest still prevailed, there were limits that not even the powerful could cross without consequences. We left Bombestino farm that same night. Me, Antonia, Damiano and 4 other workers who decided to leave too, tired of the colonel's abuse. We fled in an old cart, taking only what we could carry in a hurry. "Where are we going?" I asked Antonia when we were already on the road, the stars lighting our way. "To my sister's house in Kisharamobin," she replied. "It's 2 days away. The colonel has no influence there." "Hey, mother, my brothers," I insisted, my heart aching as I remembered the family that had been left behind. Damiano, who was driving the cart, looked at me kindly for the first time. "We'll send you news," he promised. "I know people who work for Ferrier and Ha. Let's find out what happened to them." Can you believe it? I didn't quite believe it. Deep down, I knew that Mom was probably beyond help, lost in her own mind. And my little brothers and sisters might have been sold off like me. The truth that I didn't know yet, but would discover weeks later, was even crueler. Mom, upon learning that I had been taken to the auction block, had done the only thing her troubled mind thought could save me. She took her own life in the hope that her soul could somehow protect me. It was the last act of love from a woman broken by a life of abuse. That night, huddled in the wagon that was slowly moving along the dirt road, I clutched my grandmother's rosary to my chest. For a moment, I had the strange sensation that Mom was there with me, wrapping me in an embrace that transcended death. And for the first time since it all began, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I had a chance to survive. Quiramobin was where I began to truly live after so long, just surviving. Antonia's sister, Dona Francisquin Ha, was a respected midwife in the small town. She lived in a simple but airy house, with a yard full of medicinal herbs that she cultivated with the care of a mother. She welcomed us without asking many questions, like someone who was used to sheltering those fleeing from some misfortune. People fleeing from the rain don't ask if the roof leaks. That's what she said when we arrived, grimy from the trip and with eyes that had seen hell. The first few months were filled with constant nightmares. I would wake up screaming in the middle of the night, sweat soaking the mat I slept on. I dreamed of the Colonel of Massimo chasing me, of the auctioneer's hammer banging, of the blacksmith's hands dragging me. Dona Francisquinha would come with a lemon balm tea, sit on the edge of the mat and wait for me to calm down. It will pass, my dear. The pain doesn't go away, but we learn to carry it. Antonia and Damiao also stayed in Kisharam Mobim. At least in the beginning, they got jobs in the house of a local merchant. She worked in the kitchen, he in the warehouse. They would come to visit me on Sundays. They always brought a piece of brown sugar or a piece of cheese. It was Damiao who brought the first news about my family 3 months after our escape. The blacksmith sold the farm and disappeared, he said, his face serious as if he were bringing bad news. He took his brothers with him, no one knows where. What he didn't say, but I understood. It's that Maria and Joaquim had probably been sold too, like me. Maybe at another auction, maybe directly to some buyer. The fate of poor children in the backlands of the 1940s was a bargaining chip that was worth little, but it was still worth it. Dona Francisquinha decided that I needed to study. A girl with an education is a girl with a future, she said. She enrolled me in the city school, small and simple, but where I learned to read and write properly, something that in my previous life was an unimaginable luxury. It was difficult at first. The other children thought I was strange, too quiet, with eyes that seemed to have seen more than they should. But little by little I adapted, learning to be a child again, even though a part of me had aged decades in those days. Terrible. At night, after classes, Dona Francisquinha would teach me the midwife's trade. At first, she would only let me prepare the herbs, boil the water, and separate the clean cloths. Over time, I learned more. How to feel the baby's position in the mother's belly. How to calm a woman in labor. How to tie the umbilical cord. It was knowledge passed down from woman to woman, as old as the world itself. Bringing life into the world cleanses the soul. She would tell me, every baby born into our hands is a chance to start over. It was through Dona Francisquinha's hands that I understood that it was a touch that did not hurt, that did not humiliate, that did not violate, hands that bowed, that comforted, that blessed, the opposite of those hands that tried to mark me forever. Time passed like water in a river, unhurriedly, but without stopping. When I turned 16, I was already known in the city as the midwife's niece and helped Dona Francisquinha in almost every birth. My body grew, leaving behind the skinny girl of the auction, but his eyes remained the same, alert, suspicious, always looking for an emergency exit, even when there was no apparent danger. It was at that time that he appeared. Sebastião, the son of the pharmacy owner, an educated young man who had gone to Fortaleza to go to college and returned to become a qualified pharmacist to help his father. He was handsome, in a simple way, without arrogance. Kind eyes behind round glasses, clean hands with trimmed nails, soft speech of someone who thinks before speaking. At first, I ran away from him like the devil runs away from the cross. When he went into Dona Francisquinha's house to bring some medicine, I found a way to disappear in the back. When I met him on the street, I lowered my head and walked past quickly. The idea of a man being interested in me brought back nightmares, the colonel's dirty hands, the smell of kashika, the unbearable weight on my body. He's not like the others, Dona Francisquinha told me one day, after Sebastião had been there and I had hidden once more. Give the boy a chance, at least to talk. I was reluctant for months, but Sebastião was persistent, without being invasive. He brought books that he thought I would like. He left them with Dona Francisquinha when I refused to show up. Once he brought a little bottle with a special hand ointment, knowing that working as a midwife left my hands constantly rough. Our first real conversation was on a Sunday afternoon on a bench in the square. He was there when I passed by on my way back from church and invited me to sit down. Against all my better judgment, I accepted. Why do you insist so much? I asked bluntly, my eyes fixed on the ground. Because I see a strength in you that I've never seen in anyone else. He answered with the sincerity of someone who hasn't learned to lie properly. You carry a pain that I don't know what happened, and I'll only know if one day you want to tell me. But still, even with all this pain, you help bring life into the world, you take care of others, you study, you move forward. How could you not admire someone like that? His words caught me off guard. It wasn't cheap flirting, it wasn't an attempt at seduction, it was recognition, something I had never received from a man. That day, I didn't tell him my story, nor on the many Sundays that followed, when our meetings in the square became a discreet habit that the whole city soon noticed. But little by little, like water slowly wearing away stone, his constant and respectful presence began to break down my defenses. Sebastião never tried to touch me without permission, never raised his voice, never demanded anything. When, 6 months after our first meeting, I held his hand for the first time, he cried. "That's it?" A grown man crying with emotion at being able to hold a woman's hand. That was when I understood that there were men different from the ones who had marked my childhood. On my 18th birthday, Sebastião asked me to marry him. It wasn't a surprise, it wasn't an assumption. We had talked about it before, many times. I had laid all my conditions, all my fears on the table. I don't know if I can do it. I want to be a wife like the others, I had warned. There are things that I don't know if I'll ever be able to do. I don't want you like the others, he replied. I want you exactly as you are, in your time, in your way. Dona Francisquinha was like a mother in the wedding preparations. She sewed my simple, white dress, the likes of which I never thought I would wear again after that infamous day. Antonia, who now lived in Sobral, but came especially for the occasion, prepared the cake. Damian, who had become a small merchant in Quata, brought the drinks. It was a small ceremony at the main church in Quixeramobim. The priest, who knew a little about my story through Dona Francisquinha, was especially kind. There was no big party afterwards, just a small gathering at my aunt's house with the people who really mattered. The night of nuptials was what terrified me the most, even though I trusted Sebastian, as I had never trusted any man. He noticed my fear, and on the first night in our new house, a simple little house behind the pharmacy, he simply hugged me and said, "Shall we sleep, Zifa? Just sleep. The rest will come when you're ready, even if it takes years." It would take months, in fact, until I could let him touch me in a more intimate way, and a few more months until we could actually consummate our marriage. But Sebastião never complained, never demanded, never made me feel less because of my traumas. The 1950s passed like this, living a simple but dignified life in Quixeramobim. I worked with Dona Francisquinha during births, helped Sebastião in the pharmacy when needed, and maintained our house. The city grew slowly, like everything in the countryside. The arrival of electricity was an event that shook everyone. Suddenly, we could have a refrigerator, listen to the radio without worrying about the batteries. In 1957, a news item in the newspaper that arrived from Fortaleza caught my attention. Colonel Horacio Damasceno, a large landowner, dies rural. The text spoke of the fortune he had left behind, the properties, and the children who were now fighting over the inheritance. Of course, it didn't mention the girls he had bought at auction, the abuse, or the cruelty. The official story never mentions the victims. I thought I would feel some relief upon hearing of his death, but I felt nothing. It was like receiving news of someone who had been gone from my life for a long time. I put the newspaper in a box and never looked at it again. In the early 1960s, after almost 10 years of marriage, I finally got pregnant. Sebastião's joy was immense, but restrained and respectful, as always. He knew that for me the pregnancy brought back complex memories of my mother, of my lost childhood. June 10, 1961. I will never forget the day my daughter was born. It was a difficult, long birth, and it almost took me with it. Dona Francisquinha, who already had completely white hair, controlled everything with her decades of experience. When I finally heard the girl's loud cries, an inexplicable peace took hold of me. "Will she be called Esperanca?" I announced, holding that warm little body against my chest. Because that's what I never lost, even in the worst moments. And so began a new phase of my life. Motherhood brought me healing that I didn't even know I needed. Seeing my daughter grow up free, loved, protected, gave me a joy that made up for all the pains of the past. Sebastião was a present, patient, loving father, the opposite of all the male figures I knew in my childhood. The 60s arrived with changes that were too fast for a small town like ours. At first, television appeared only in the main square, then in some wealthier homes. The radio brought worrying news. Confused politics in Brasilia, the military taking power, freedoms being cut. In 1964, an unexpected event changed the course of my story again. Dona Francisquinha, my second mother, my savior, left this world silently on a winter night. She slept and never woke up again at the age of 82, after giving birth to hundreds of children in the region. The funeral brought together people we didn't even know she knew. Women from all ages, mothers and daughters who had been born by the hands of that tireless midwife. In her will, she left her house and her few belongings to me so that I could continue the work, the simple document said. It was a moment of decision. Esperanca was only 3 years old. Sebastião had the pharmacy to take care of, but I felt it was my duty to continue Dona Francisquinha's legacy, not only as a midwife, but as a help for women in need. "I'm going to turn her house into a shelter," I told Sebastião one night after Esperanca was asleep. "A place for women who need to escape from men like the ones I met. A place I didn't have, but that could have saved my mother, my sisters." Sebastião, as always, supported without question. "Whatever you need, I'm here." That's all I said. We started slowly, with few conditions. The first to arrive was Marin Alva, a 16-year-old girl, pregnant by her boss who kicked her out when he found out. Then came Luzia, her face disfigured by a beating from her husband, and her 2 small children clinging to her skirt. Then, Raidenha, just 13 years old, who had been sold by her father to a 60-year-old merchant and ran away at the first opportunity. The news spread like wildfire. Soon the house that had belonged to Dona Francisquinha was no longer big enough. We had to expand, build 2 more rooms at the back. Sebastião used part of the pharmacy's profits to keep the place running. I started planting a large vegetable garden so that at least there would be no shortage of food. It had no official name, no legal structure, nothing like that. It was just Zifa's house, a refuge known through whispers between women, through messages passed on by truck drivers, through former patients of Dona Francisquinha, who knew that there was a chance for a new beginning there. In 1967, we received the visit that would change everything. A social worker from Fortaleza, Dr. Helena, found out about our work through a patient who had been to the shelter. He showed up unannounced on a hot February afternoon. Tall, with short cropped hair and large glasses, she had an efficient manner that scared me at first. "What you are doing here is illegal and, at the same time, essential," she said after spending the day getting to know the place and talking to the women who are sheltering there. "Without official authorization, without government resources, without adequate structure, but saving lives that no one else cares about saving." Instead of closing the place, as we feared, Darasai, Helena returned to Fortaleza with a mission, to get official recognition for the shelter. 3 months later, she returned with papers, stamps, promises of funding and a name, Abrigo Esperanca, like my daughter. "The government is interested in showing that it is concerned about social issues," she explained, without illusions. "Even if it's just for show." Let's take advantage of this. That's how, at the age of 32, I officially became the director of a shelter for women in vulnerable situations. I, who had been merchandise at auction, now had a room with my name on the door and letterhead. Life has these ironies. The following years were of constant growth. With official recognition came resources, few, always insufficient, but better than nothing. We managed to hire a nurse, a cook, and even a teacher to teach the children who arrived with their mothers. The house was renovated, expanded, improved. Most importantly, we developed a system to help women start over. It wasn't just about offering a temporary roof over their heads, but giving them the tools they needed to support themselves later. Sewing, crafts, cooking courses. For the younger ones, the chance to finish the studies that many had abandoned. For everyone, the opportunity to rebuild self-esteem destroyed by years of abuse. Sebastião, always by my side, used his contacts as a pharmacist to get jobs for our graduates. His pharmacy became the first formal job for many of them, who then went on to other opportunities. Hope grew among these women, learning from an early age about solidarity, about struggle, about feminine strength in the face of the worst adversities. In 1970, an unexpected event brought the past back to my door. A woman arrived late at night, carrying a small bundle and her face covered in bruises. When we received her and she finally looked up with her swollen eyes, I nearly fell backwards. It was Maria, my sister Maria. 25 years after we were separated, there she was. Unrecognizable if it weren't for the eyes, the same eyes as our mothers, the same eyes I saw in the mirror every day. We hugged each other for endless minutes, crying all the tears we had held back for decades. She could hardly believe that I was alive, that I had escaped, that I was now helping other women. I could hardly believe the miracle of having found her again. Her story was as hard as mine. Sold by a blacksmith to a family in Sobral as a domestic servant, she suffered all types of abuse from the age of 8 to 16. Ran away when he couldn't take it anymore. She lived on the streets for a while, was rescued by nuns, and got a job as a washerwoman. She married a man who seemed good at first, but who drink turned into a monster. When he threatened to kill their 2-year-old son, she ran away again, found out about the shelter through an acquaintance and came without knowing I was here. And Joachim? I asked, fearing the answer. He died of fever when he was years old. She answered, her eyes downcast, on the farm where Ferrier and Ha sold us. They didn't even call doctors. Another wasted life, another child that the world pretended not to see. Meeting Maria again changed something inside me. It was as if a lost piece of my soul had returned to its place. A hole that I didn't even know existed was being filled. My sister stayed at the shelter for almost a year. Enough time to recover from the visible wounds and start treating the invisible ones, which were much deeper. Her son, my nephew Tonin Ho, was a quiet boy, with frightened eyes, who would cower when any man approached. He was even afraid of Sebastião at first. It took months for him to trust that he wouldn't be hurt, until he was a real child again, playing in the yard with the hope that he was already 10 years old. "How did you do it, Zifa?" Maria asked me one night as we watched the children sleeping together in the hammock on the porch. "How did you manage to build a life after everything we've been through?" "One day at a time," I answered, putting my arm around his. Her shoulders. "And a lot of help. I was lucky to meet good people along the way." "I still have nightmares," she confessed, her voice low. "I dream about Ferrier and Ha, about the bosses in Sobral, about everything." "Me too," I admitted. "Less than before, but I still have it. I don't think they ever go away completely, but you didn't let them destroy you. Look at everything you built, the lives you saved." That conversation kept going around in my head for days. It was true that the Hope Shelter had grown, helping dozens of women, but what about the thousands of others spread across Brazil? Those who had no way of escaping, those who didn't know there was a place to take them in, those who were being sold at that exact moment like I was one day. The next morning, I called Dr. Helena for a serious conversation. She now came regularly from Fortaleza to supervise the work and ensure that the few official resources continued to arrive. "We need to do more," he said bluntly. "The problem is much bigger than our shelter." "What are you thinking, Mrs. Zfot?" she asked, always practical. "First I want to tell my story, all of it, to whoever will listen." Helena adjusted her glasses thoughtfully. "You will face resistance. A lot of people don't want to hear about these things. They prefer to pretend they don't exist. That's precisely why you need to listen," I insisted. "And I want to look for other women like my sister. I'm sure there are many out there, hidden, suffering alone." That's how we started what we called caravans. Once a month, Helena, a few other women from the shelter and I would take the rural Willis, which we had obtained through a donation, and go to neighboring communities, isolated farms, forgotten villages. We took food, basic medicines, school supplies for children. It was our way of opening doors, of making people trust. Afterwards, when the men were away, we would gather the women together and tell our stories. We talked about the shelter, we left a contact, usually a trustworthy local business owner for anyone who needed help. In the beginning, we faced a lot of distrust. Women were afraid to speak up, afraid of being seen talking to us, afraid of the consequences. The men looked at us with hostility. Some even went so far as to expel us from their lands when they discovered the real reason for our visit. "You come here to put nonsense in women's heads," shouted a farmer named Pompeu, threatening us with a shotgun. "Go away before I forget your women." But for every door closed in our face, there were 10 hopeful looks, 10 women who kept our contact details hidden in the seam of their clothes, 10 girls who for the first time heard that they didn't deserve to be treated like objects. One of the most memorable caravans was in 1972, when we went to a farm on the outskirts of Quicksada. The place gave me goosebumps as soon as we arrived. Something about the layout of the houses, the heavy air, reminded me of Colonel Massino's farm. The feeling was confirmed when I discovered that it was one of the properties that had belonged to him, now managed by one of his sons. Enrique Damasceno had the same appearance as his father, tall, slow-moving, with small, calculating eyes. But unlike the old colonel, he had a formal education, a veneer of sophistication that barely disguised the same cruelty. "These are the ladies of the such a shelter, isn't it?" He welcomed us on the porch of Casagrande without offering to let us in. "I've heard about the social work they do." The contempt in his voice was palpable. I pretended not to notice, keeping the polite smile I had learned to use as a mask in situations like this. "We came to bring some donations for the workers," I replied. "School supplies for the children, some basic medicines." "Very generous," he said ironically. "You can leave them over there with the foreman. He distributes it eventually." We knew what that meant. The donations would never reach their intended recipients. But we weren't there just for that. In fact, if you would allow, we would like to deliver it in person. Some of the medications need explanation on how to use. He hesitated, clearly irritated by our insistence, but he must have been concerned about appearances. Times were changing, even in the countryside. You could no longer treat people the way his father had treated them, at least not openly. "I have an hour," he finally granted, "and I want one of my men to accompany me." We managed to lose the foreman who was following us and gather some women behind the shed where they kept the tools. There were 5 of them of different ages, all with the same defeated look that I knew so well. I quickly explained who we were, what we did, how they could find us if they needed to. One of them, the oldest, stayed behind when the others had already gone. She must have been about 50, but she looked much older. The body bent from decades of hard work, the face marked by deep wrinkles. "You came from here, didn't you?" she asked. The voice was almost a whisper. I felt the blood run cold in my veins. "How do your eyes know?" "I've seen those eyes before. The other girl he bought many years ago made my heart skip a beat." "What girl?" "I don't know the name. I was little, maybe 10 years old. That was a long time ago, before the old man died. He kept her locked in a room near the barn. We heard the screams at night." "What happened to her?" I asked, even though I feared the answer. The woman lowered her eyes. "Disappeared after a few months. The colonel said he had escaped, but no one believed him. He was too angry. He broke everything in her room. They say she is buried somewhere on the property." I returned to the jeep, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. It could have been me, I thought. If Antonia and Damiao hadn't helped me that night, I could have ended up like that nameless girl, buried in an unmarked grave. On the way back to Kiramoban, I made a silent promise to her, to all the others, who were not as lucky as me. I would not rest as long as there were girls being sold, women being abused, lives being wasted by men who thought they owned the world. The work intensified in the following years. In 1974, we were able to open a second unit of the shelter in Quishigzada, with the help of a substantial donation from a politician who wanted to clean up his image after a scandal. I didn't care about his motives. The money would save lives, that was all that mattered. Esperanca, now 13 years old, began to actively participate in the work. She had inherited her father's determination and her mother's strength, a combination that made her an extraordinary young woman. I studied with Finko, dreaming of becoming a doctor one day, but I also learned from her the art of midwifery, how to listen to stories of pain without breaking down, how to extend a hand without pity, but with solidarity. "Why did you choose that name for me, Mom?" she asked me one night as she helped me organize the shelter records. "Because it was what kept me alive," I answered simply. "What happened to you before you met Dad, before the shelter?" She had never told me. It was true. I had told my story to dozens, hundreds of women over the years, but never to my own daughter. For some reason, it seemed harder, more painful, maybe out of fear that she would see me differently, maybe out of wanting to protect her from knowing the cruelty of the world so early. But now, looking at her, almost an intelligent, compassionate woman, I realized it was time. She deserved to know where she came from, what battles had been fought so that she could live in freedom. That night, while Sebastiao was at the pharmacy doing the monthly balance sheet, I told Esperanca everything. The auction, the Colonel of Massino, the escape, the years with Dona Francisquinha, the slow construction of a new life. I didn't sugarcoat the story, I didn't hide the most painful parts. She deserved the full truth. When I finished, her eyes were teary, but her gaze was steady. "Now I understand," she finally said. "I always thought the shelter was important, but I never realized how much. It's not just a job for you, it's redemption." "Not only that," I gently corrected. "It's justice. It's giving other women what I didn't have, what your grandmother didn't have, what so many others didn't have. I want to help more," she said determinedly. "Not just here at the shelter, but bigger. I want the laws to change. I want these men to be punished. I want the girls to be safe." I smiled, feeling a mixture of pride and concern. "It's a big fight, daughter." "Did you start it?" she replied, taking my hand. "I will continue." The 70s progressed, bringing rapid changes even to the interior of Ceará. Television, now present in many homes, brought images from the rest of Brazil, from the world. Even with the censorship of the dictatorship, ideas of freedom and women's rights began to circulate. In 1975, The UN declared the International Year of Women, and we took the opportunity to intensify our work. We created a simple, mimeographed newspaper that we called Voice of Hope. We distributed them at fairs, in churches, wherever we could reach women. We published anonymous survivor stories, information about rights, and help contacts. The authorities did not like it. In August of that year, we received a visit from 2 police officers, men with stern faces, in uniform, carrying truncheons and revolvers that they made a point of making visible. They came to investigate subversive activities in the shelter. "We hear you are distributing communist material," said the elder, leafing through an issue of our newspaper with contempt, "inciting women against their husbands, against the traditional family." "We show the truth," I replied, remaining calm. "If the truth bothers you, maybe the problem isn't with the person telling it." "Be careful what you say, ma'am," he warned, slamming the truncheon into the palm of his hand. "People disappear for a lot less these days." It was not an empty threat. We knew that. Even in the interior, even far from the big cities, repression arrived when it suited someone in power. An anonymous complaint, an accusation of subversion, was enough. And people were taken away, interrogated, some never seen again. We decided to be more cautious, but not to stop. The newspaper continued to circulate, now distributed by trusted hands, from woman to woman. The caravans became more discreet, but they still happened. The shelter continued to operate, now with greater care to avoid attracting unwanted attention. In 1976, Sebastião fell ill. It started with a persistent cough that we attributed to the dry weather in the backlands. Then came the chest pains, the difficulty breathing, the constant tiredness. The doctor from Quararamobin, a longtime friend, gave us the news we feared. Lung cancer, already in an advanced stage. "How long?" asked Sebastião, with the same calmness with which he asked the price of a medicine at the pharmacy. 6 months, maybe a year if we're lucky, the doctor replied bluntly. I knew that Sebastião preferred the truth, no matter how harsh it was. Those were the hardest months of my life since those terrible days on the colonel's farm. Watching my companion of so many years wither away day after day, losing his vigor, his strength, but never his good humor, never the kindness that defined him. Hope. Then, at the age of 15, he took over much of the work at the pharmacy, showing a maturity beyond his years. In January 1977, on a warm summer night, Sebastião passed away. It was a peaceful death at home, holding my hands and those of our daughter. His last words were to me. "You taught me what true courage is, Zfa. Keep fighting." The funeral brought the entire town together. Sebastião was loved, respected, the pharmacist who often gave medicine on credit or even for free to those who could not afford it. The women who had been to the shelter came from far away to say goodbye to the man, who for many was the first example that not all men were monsters. Grief came like a wave, dragging me to a dark place that I hadn't visited for decades. For a few weeks, I could barely get out of bed, let alone run the shelter. It was Maria, my sister, who took charge during that time. Now married again, to a good man, this time, she lived in Quixada, but she came whenever she could. "He wouldn't want to see you like this," she said one afternoon, bringing me tea and forcing me to eat a piece of cake. "Sebastião believed in your work as much as you did." Slowly I came back to life. First a few hours a day at the shelter, then the whole day. We resumed the caravans, the newspaper, all the work that had been temporarily suspended. The pain didn't lessen, but I learned to carry it along with all the other pain that was already part of me. Esperança decided not to pursue medicine as she had originally planned. Instead, she opted for law. "I want to change the laws, Mom," she explained. "I want men like those who bought you, who hurt Aunt Maria, who destroy so many lives, to pay for what they do." In 1979, she left for Fortaleza to study. It was like tearing out a piece of my heart, but I knew it was necessary. My daughter had wings of her own, and now she had a mission as important as mine. The end of the 1970s brought the first signs of political openness and the loosening of the dictatorship. We took advantage of this moment to expand our work even further. With the help of Dr. Helena, now retired and fully dedicated to the shelter, we obtained international funding from organizations that supported women's causes around the world. In 1980, we celebrated the 15th anniversary of the founding of Abrigo Esperanza with a significant achievement, the opening of a unit in Fortaleza, our first foray into the capital. It was a simple building in a peripheral area of the city, but it represented a huge step forward. Now we could reach many more women, have access to resources that only existed in the capital, and establish partnerships with universities, hospitals, and other organizations. Esperanza, already in her third year of college, was instrumental in gaining support from the academic community. She organized groups of student volunteers who offered free legal assistance to the women at the shelter. She created a newsletter that circulated on campus. She mobilized teachers to give lectures and workshops. That same year, we received a visit at the Kishore Mobim shelter that would unexpectedly close a circle in my life. A woman in her 60s, with completely white hair, a face marked by deep wrinkles, and a defeated look, arrived alone, carrying only a plastic bag with a few belongings. "My name is Antonia," she said when I greeted her in the entrance hall. "I worked for many years on Colonel Massino's farm. I don't know if you remember me." The shock left me speechless for a few moments. Of course I remembered. How could I forget the woman who, together with Damiao, had saved my life on that terrible night? "Antonia," I finally whispered, standing up to hug her. "Of course I remember, you saved me." She seemed surprised by the hug, stiffening for a moment before relaxing and returning it. "I never knew what happened to you after we ran away," she said, her voice breaking. "I always hoped I had found a better fate." "Found it," confirmed it. "Thanks to you and Damiao." "Where is he?" "I want to thank you too." Her gaze dropped and I understood before she even answered. "Damiao died 5 years ago. Pneumonia. We never had money for good doctors." The guilt hit me like a punch. All these years building the shelter, helping so many women, and I had never reached out to the two people who made it all possible. "Forgive me," I begged, tears streaming freely. "I should have come to you sooner." "There was no way of knowing where we were," she said gently. "We moved around a lot, always working on different farms. Only now, when I was too old for the hard work and they sent me away, did I learn about your shelter. A woman at the market told me. She said it had been founded by a Zifa who had also run away from the colonel's farm. I thought it might be you." Antonia stayed with us permanently after that. Not as a temporary resident, but as part of the staff. Even at her advanced age, she had much to offer. Her experience, her kindness, her ability to comfort women who arrived as broken as I had been that distant night. Together we reminisced about those terrible days, filling in the gaps in each other's stories. I learned that after our escape, the colonel tried to find us for months, offering a reward, spreading lies about us stealing from him. Eventually he gave up, replacing us with other employees, other victims. "He never changed," Antonia said. "Until the end he was still the same monster, but he was more careful, he hid what he was doing better." Times were changing, even in that backwater. In 1982, a report on Jornal Nacional shocked Brazil by exposing a child trafficking ring in the Northeast. Poor girls and boys were being sold into slave labor, sexual exploitation, and illegal adoption abroad. The report showed isolated farms where clandestine auctions were taking place, very similar to the one where I had been sold decades earlier. "Some things never change," Antonia commented as we watched the report together on the shelter's small television. But the difference is that now they're talking about it, I replied. When it happened to me, to you, to so many others. It was a dirty secret that everyone knew about but no one mentioned. The report sparked national outrage, investigation committees, and promises from politicians. In practice, little changed immediately, but it was a start, a crack in the wall of silence that protected the powerful. Esperanca graduated in law in 1984 and immediately began working on cases related to women and children who were victims of violence. Together with other newly graduated lawyers, she created the Center for the Defense of Women's Rights, which offered free legal assistance and lobbied for changes in the law. It was 1985 when I decided to change the name of our shelter. After 2 decades of work, hundreds of women welcomed and recognition that had already gone beyond the borders of Ceará, I felt that we needed a name that honored all the women who had passed through our doors, not just my daughter, the Margaritas Shelter. I announced it at a meeting with our team, which by then had more than 20 people, most of them women who had once been residents. Because daisies are simple, hardy flowers that grow in the most difficult terrain and always turn their faces to the sun. Like many important decisions in my life, this one was also inspired by a dream. The night before, I had dreamed of my mother, not the haggard, empty-eyed figure of my last days with her, but a strong woman with an easy smile, picking daisies in a sunny field. In the dream, she handed me a bouquet of these flowers and said, "Plant them wherever you can, daughter. They will grow even in the most unlikely places." The redemocratization of Brazil brought a breath of hope to our work. With the end of the dictatorship, we could speak more openly, denounce with more security, pressure authorities without the constant fear of reprisals. The 1988 Constitution, with its advances in human rights and gender equality, gave us new tools to fight. Esperanca, now 27 years old and a respected lawyer, actively participated in the constituent discussions through women's groups that sent proposals to the deputies when the final text was approved, including articles that established equal rights and duties between men and women. She called me from Brasilia, where she was following the vote. "We did it, Mom," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "It's not perfect. There is still a long way to go, but it is a start, a foundation for building what lies ahead." My daughter had become an extraordinary woman, far beyond anything I ever dreamed for her. Married to a university professor who fully supported her work, mother of 2 children who were being raised to respect all people, regardless of gender, color, or origin, she divided her time between advocacy and political activism. During this same period, Antonia, already approaching 70 years of age, became a central figure in the Margaritas Shelter. Her life experience, her wisdom acquired through so much suffering, made her an incomparable counselor for the women who came to us. Dr. Helena joked that Antonia was worth more than 10 psychologists together. "The girls trust her instantly," he once commented, observing how a young woman who had just arrived, still scared and suspicious, opened up completely after just half an hour of talking to Antonia. "It's because she doesn't pretend, she doesn't theorize," I replied. "She's been there, she knows the pain from the inside." In 1990, when I was already 55 years old and a few gray hairs were starting to appear in my black hair, I had one of the most remarkable experiences of my life. I was invited to speak at the Federal Senate in a public hearing on the trafficking of women and children in Brazil. It was the first time I had traveled to Brasilia, the first time I had stepped onto the red carpet of the National Congress. I, who had been sold for 4,000 reais in a clandestine child auction, was now there before the representatives of the nation to tell my story and demand justice for so many others who continued to go through the same horror. The auditorium was full. Senators, deputies, journalists, representatives of human rights organizations. Esperanca was in the front row, her eyes filled with pride. Next to her, Maria, my sister, who had insisted on coming, even with a fear of airplanes that she had never completely overcome. When I was given the floor, I felt a lump in my throat. For a moment, I was that 12-year-old girl again, terrified and helpless. But then I looked at my daughter, at my sister, and my strength returned. My name is Josefa Clementina de Alencar. I began, my voice firm, despite my racing heart. I was born in 1935, in the backlands of Ceará. At the age of 12, I was sold like merchandise in a clandestine auction. My buyer was the very man who had abused my mother years before. For almost an hour, I told my story without omitting the most painful details, but also without allowing myself to be defined only by the tragedy. I spoke of the escape, the reconstruction, the shelter, the hundreds of women we had helped. I spoke of the laws that needed to change, of the impunity that still protected the powerful, of the indifference that allowed those practices to continue happening at the end of the 20th century. When I finished, the silence in the auditorium was deafening. Then, slowly, people stood up, applauding. It wasn't the kind of enthusiastic applause of someone who has just watched an enjoyable show. It was the solemn, almost painful applause of someone who recognizes an uncomfortable truth that can no longer be ignored. The results of that hearing went beyond what we had expected. A parliamentary commission of inquiry was created to investigate human trafficking in the country. Laws were proposed to toughen penalties for abusers. A national awareness campaign was launched by the Ministry of Justice. Of course, it wasn't an instant transformation. The power structures, the patriarchy, the social inequality that fueled these practices, all of this remained firmly rooted in Brazilian society. But it was a beginning, a crack in the wall that could eventually lead to its fall. Back in Quiramoban, after the turmoil of the capital, I found a surprise I never imagined possible. A letter sent from São Paulo in the shaky handwriting of an elderly person. The sender was Joaquim Ferreira dos Santos. My brother Joaquim was alive. The letter, brief and direct, said that he had seen my photo in the newspaper in a report about the hearing in Brasilia. He recognized my name, my story. He said that I had not died of fever as Maria believed. Ferreirinha had sold him separately to a family in São Paulo who needed cheap labor in their small shoe factory. I spent years believing that you and Maria were dead. He wrote, the man who bought me said that my entire family had died, that I should be grateful that he had taken me in. Like so many other children in that situation, Joaquim grew up working in inhumane conditions, suffering physical and psychological abuse. He managed to escape at the age of 16, lived on the streets for a while, then was taken in by a priest who taught him the carpentry trade. Eventually he set up his own workshop, got married, and had children. I never told my full story to anyone, I confessed in the letter, not even to my wife. I was ashamed, scared, I don't know how to explain it, but when I saw you speaking openly, being applauded, respected, I felt that maybe it was time to face my own past. 2 weeks later, the three of us were together for the first time in almost half a century. Me, Maria and Joaquim. The reunion took place at the Margaritas shelter, which seemed the most appropriate place for this late miracle. Joaquim was 50 years old, with gray hair and calloused hands from someone who had worked with wood all his life. He brought his wife Conseco and his 2 adult children, who looked open-mouthed at their uncles and cousins, whom they had never known existed until a few weeks before. Those days were filled with tears and laughter, with painful stories and unexpected triumphs. Sebastiana's 3 children, brutally separated by human cruelty, are finally reunited. We couldn't make up for lost time, but we could build something new from there. Did you build all this? Joaquim said the night before returning to São Paulo, looking around the shelter. You transformed your pain into something that saves other people. I didn't do it alone, I replied, thinking of Dona Francisquinha, Sebastião, Antonia, Helena, Esperança, and everyone who had been part of that journey. No one achieves anything truly important alone. The 1990s passed at a fast pace. The shelter grew and became more professional. We now had social workers, psychologists, and lawyers, many of whom were former residents who had managed to study and return to help others. The support network we had created now covered the entire Northeast, with units in 3 states. In addition to Ceará, in 1995, another important milestone was the Sebastiana Memory Center, a small museum attached to the original shelter in Quixeram Mobim, where we told the story of violence against women and children in Brazil, but also the story of resistance, reconstruction, and the fight for rights. We named it in honor of my mother, who had never she could see what her daughter had become, but whose life and death had been the catalyst for everything. Among the items on display was the blue beaded rosary she had given me that last afternoon before the auction. I had kept that relic for decades, the only object that connected me to my origins. Now, inside a glass dome, it represented not only my personal story, but that of so many other women who had found the strength to survive in the most adverse conditions. In the year 2000, a surprise I had never expected. I was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. I didn't win, of course. The prize went to South Korean Kim Dae-jung for her work for democracy and human rights. But just being nominated by a group of women's rights organizations from several countries was an unimaginable honor for someone with my background. "See, Mom," I said hopefully when the news arrived. "From the auction to the Nobel Prize. If that's not a testament to your strength, I don't know what is." The turn of the millennium found me at 65, still active at the shelter, but already delegating more responsibilities to the increasingly skilled staff. My hair, now completely white, gave me an appearance of wisdom that sometimes made me laugh when I looked in the mirror. Inside I still felt like that girl from the backlands, learning to navigate an often hostile world. The arrival of the internet, even in the interior of Ceará, revolutionized our work. Suddenly, we could connect at-risk women with help services instantly. We could report abuse in real time, mobilize support, and pressure authorities through emerging social networks. Esperança, always ahead of her time, created the first website for the Margaritas shelter in 2001. On the home page, a simple sentence that summed up decades of work, because every woman deserves the chance to flourish, even in the most arid terrains. In 2005, at age 70, I decided it was time to pass the baton. I appointed as the new director of the shelter an extraordinary woman named Luya, who had come to us 20 years earlier, at the age of 15, pregnant and beaten by her own father. With our help, she finished her studies, graduated in social work, raised her daughter alone and became one of the most efficient coordinators we have ever had. "I'm not retiring," I clarified at the transition ceremony, "just changing roles. Now I'll be the shelter's grandma, telling stories and giving advice that no one asked for." The audience laughed, but everyone knew that my presence would continue to be essential. Some of the younger women who came up to us had a hard time believing that this lady with white hair and a gentle smile had been through such brutal experiences. My living testimony was proof that survival, healing, and even transformation were possible. The following years brought challenges that I never imagined I would face at such an advanced age. The fight for women's rights, which seemed to be advancing steadily, encountered renewed resistance. Conservative groups began attacking what they call gender ideology, trying to dismantle hard-won gains. "It's always like this," I said hopefully. Now, a renowned lawyer specializing in human rights. Every step forward provokes a reaction. We have to be prepared. In 2010, we celebrated the shelter's 45th anniversary with an event that brought together hundreds of women who had passed through our doors over the decades. They came from all corners of Brazil. Some were professionally successful, others were still struggling to establish themselves, but all of them carried within themselves the mark of resistance. One of them, Margarita, whose name was no coincidence, had been chosen for herself in honor of the shelter. Now, a state deputy gave a speech that moved me deeply. Dona Zifa didn't just save our lives, she said, looking directly at me. She showed us that our lives were worth saving. Instead of constantly telling us that we were nothing, she insisted that we were everything. In 2015, at the age of 80, I faced a different battle. An aggressive breast cancer that required surgery, chemotherapy, and all the strength I thought I had used throughout my life. Esperanca and her children took turns accompanying me to treatment sessions in Fortaleza. Maria temporarily moved into my home in Quixeramobim to care for me on my worst days. "It's not fair," my sister said one night as she helped me through a particularly violent bout of chemo-induced vomiting. "You've suffered enough in this life." "Life isn't about justice, Maria," I replied when I could catch my breath. "It's about moving forward no matter what. I survived like I've survived everything before." The cancer went into remission, leaving a scar on my left breast as a reminder and an even deeper appreciation for each day I was given. In 2018, an important law was finally passed in Brazil, Law 13,718, which more clearly defined crimes such as sexual harassment and dissemination of rape scenes. In the same year, the Constitution turned 30, reaffirming the equality of rights between men and women, which had been such an important achievement. But it was also a year of worrying setbacks in the field of human rights. Brazil, like so many other countries, was facing a wave of conservatism that threatened decades of progress. Organizations like ours, which defended women, LGBT people, indigenous populations, and other vulnerable groups, began to be attacked, labeled as enemies of the traditional family. "This is not the first time we have faced headwinds," she said in an interview with a national newspaper that reported on the Margaritas shelter. "And it will not be the last. The important thing is to keep your roots firm and your face turned to the sun, like the flowers that give us our name." Today, at 88 years old, sitting on the porch of the same house where I lived with Sebastião, I look back and see a life that I could never have imagined when I was that terrified girl at a human auction. A life of pain, yes, but also of purpose, of love, of transformation. The Margaritas shelter now continues with branches in 7 Brazilian states. Thousands of women have passed through our doors over almost 6 decades. Some stayed to work with us, others went their own way, but all took with them the central message that we try to convey. You are not defined by what was done to you, but by what you choose to do with it. Esperanca, now 61 years old, continues on the front lines of the fight for women's rights, having expanded her work to the international level. Maria, 83 for years, she has coordinated a craft group that generates income for women in vulnerable situations. Antonia left us in 2010, at the age of 95, after having helped 3 generations of women find their way to healing. My grandchildren, now adults, follow paths that honor the family legacy. One as a doctor specializing in treating victims of violence, another as a judge committed to the fair application of the law, especially in cases involving women and children. My great-grandchildren are growing up in a world that, despite all the challenges, is more aware and vigilant against the injustices that almost destroyed my life. I have no illusions that the work is complete. As long as we are alive, we know that the fight continues. There are still clandestine auctions taking place in remote places in Brazil. There is still trafficking of women and children. There is still exploitation, abuse, silencing. But there is also resistance, solidarity, transformation. To you who have listened to me this far, my daughter, my son, I want to thank you. It is not easy to hear stories like mine. It hurts, revolts, disturbs, and that is how it should be. Pain that is not confronted never truly heals, whether in the individual or in society. If this story touched your heart, please like this video so that it can reach more people. Subscribe to the channel to learn more stories of women who, like me, turned tragedy into triumph. And if you want to receive all the real stories via WhatsApp, go to the description of this video, which has a link for you to join the Grannies group. Always remember, we are all daisies, simple, resilient and always facing the sun, even on the darkest days.